Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to really get into a book that struck a chord with so many people, The 5-Second Rule by Mel Robbins.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be exploring this one.
In this deep dive, we really want to focus on how this deceptively simple rule can give you that push you need to take action and, really change things in your life.
I'm excited too. The core idea is just so practical. When you get that gut feeling, that instinct to do something important,
hmm
you just use a countdown 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and launch yourself into action before your brain can talk you out of it.
Exactly. So our mission today is basically to pull out those practical tools, those inspiring examples Mel Robbins shares,
Right.
so that you, listening right now, can start applying these principles like immediately in your own day-to-day life. Okay, let's start by breaking down this idea of the power of everyday courage.
Yeah, what I find really fascinating is how the book defines courage. It's not presented as this, huge, grand thing reserved for heroes.
Right, not just for extraordinary moments.
Exactly. It's framed as this essential skill for facing things that feel difficult or scary or uncertain in our normal lives. It's a really empowering shift in perspective.
Robbins is super clear on this point. Courage isn't some luxury for a select few. It's something we all have, like a birthright, just waiting to be activated. And she shares a really vivid personal story that kind of illustrates this, doesn't she?
Oh, yeah. She talks about being in a really rough patch in her life, like really rough.
Mm-hmm.
And she saw a TV commercial about a rocket launch. That countdown, 5, 4, 3, 2, it just hit her differently.
Ah.
So the next day, she decided to use that same countdown to literally launch herself out of bed like she was the rocket.
Yeah.
That specific moment, it was pivotal. It was the spark that showed her the power of acting on an idea, an instinct, without hesitation.
And this link between our instincts and actually acting towards our goals. The book mentions there's research backing this up.
Correct. Yeah, she points to studies from places like the University of Arizona, Cornell, Duke, showing that when we set a goal, our brain starts creating this sort of mental checklist of related actions.
Okay.
So when we encounter something that could help us reach that goal, our brain kind of flags it, triggering those instincts to nudge us into action. Think about it like if your goal is to get fit and you walk past a gym.
You feel that little pull.
Exactly. That little nudge, that urge to go in. That's your brain recognizing an opportunity related to your goal.
Absolutely. It's that inner voice we so often just ignore or rationalize away. And the book also highlights how some pretty amazing inventions came about just from following that kind of intuition.
It's true. Like the matchstick. Invented when John Walker noticed a chemical mix he was stirring accidentally ignited.
Huh.
Or Velcro that came from noticing burrs sticking to a dog's fur.
Uh,
Post-it notes were Art Fry trying to find a bookmark that wouldn't fall out or damage his hymnal. Even the Frappuccino apparently came from a Starbucks manager's instinct to create a cold drink on a hot day. All examples of people trusting that initial, maybe small instinct.
This is where it gets really interesting, I think. Because ultimately, it boils down to trusting yourself, doesn't it? Honoring that inner nudge for change that we all feel and backing it up with decisive action.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's go deeper into the neuroscience behind the 5-second rule. What does the book tell us about how this simple technique actually affects our brains?
Well, what's fascinating is that the 5-second rule acts like a starting ritual. It specifically activates the prefrontal cortex in our brain.
Okay, and that's the part responsible for focus, decision-making.
Exactly. Focus, conscious decision-making, our ability to actually change our behavior deliberately. By counting backwards and then moving immediately, we essentially interrupt the brain's autopilot mode.
Autopilot, like those habitual thought patterns and behaviors that keep us stuck.
Precisely. Those patterns often keep us stuck in inaction. So the countdown kind of short-circuits that.
So it's like giving the system a little jolt, so the more rational, action-oriented part of the brain takes charge.
In a way, yes. Think of the prefrontal cortex as the CEO of your brain planning, making decisions. By deliberately activating it with the countdown, you give it an edge over, say, the amygdala, which is more about impulse and fear reactions.
Yeah.
That interruption is key to overcoming hesitation.
The book also shares a very personal story about how this rule helped Mel Robbins' husband, Chris. How did that work?
Yeah, Chris had a restaurant venture that didn't end up succeeding as they'd hoped, and he often struggled with feelings of failure around it.
That's tough.
Mel talks about how he started using the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 rule to physically shift his focus away from those negative thoughts. When they'd creep in, he'd count down and deliberately redirect his mind to what they did achieve.
Like what?
Like, 7 restaurants built, a positive work culture, millions in revenue, a recognized brand. Even though the ultimate outcome wasn't the initial dream, the lessons learned were huge. It's a great example of using the rule to reframe difficult situations.
And how did this rule first become like a public thing? And how does she validate its effectiveness?
Well, it was first shared publicly in a TEDx talk back in 2011 called How to Stop Screwing Yourself Over.
Right.
Interestingly, the talk was mainly about her dream of being a radio host and helping people live the life they wanted. The 5-second rule itself was only mentioned briefly, right at the very end.
But it resonated.
Oh, massively. The response was apparently huge and unexpected. The talk went viral, and people just started reaching out to her in droves, sharing how they were using it.
Wow. So that was the catalyst.
Exactly. Based on that flood of feedback and questions, Mel, who's actually trained as a lawyer, really dove into researching the rule properly. She looked for studies, scientific evidence, psychological underpinnings.
To figure out why it worked.
Yes, to explain why it worked and all the different ways it could be applied across various areas of life.
And as the book points out, making changes is hard. Why does our brain resist change so much sometimes? And how does the rule help us push past that resistance?
The book explains that our brains are basically wired to avoid uncertainty, things that feel scary, or anything novel. Change inherently involves those things.
So it's a protective mechanism almost.
Kind of, yeah. Our mind will try to convince us not to do it, and that hesitation, that doubt, it kicks in incredibly fast. The 5-second rule gives us this tiny window, just 5 seconds to act, before our mind can sabotage us with excuses and fears. It lets us move faster than our own self-doubt.
Okay, let's dive a bit deeper with some of those moments of courage that changed history, as presented in the book, starting with Rosa Parks.
Rosa Parks' act of defiance, refusing to give up her seat on the bus, is such a powerful example. What the book really highlights is that it wasn't some premeditated plan. It was an instinctive reaction in the moment.
Really? She didn't plan it.
According to her own accounts mentioned in the book, no. She said she just felt she wasn't being treated fairly and had a right to stay seated. When asked later if it was planned, she apparently said no, it just happened.
That's incredible, thinking about the massive impact of that single instantaneous decision. And then there's Martin Luther King Jr.'s decision to lead the Montgomery bus boycott.
Similarly, Dr. King's decision to lead the boycott was made very quickly. He actually wrote later that if he'd had more time to think about it, he probably would have declined the nomination.
Wow.
Both stories really illustrate how courage often just sparks in the moment. It's that push to do the thing that feels difficult, scary, or uncertain right then and there.
The book really does a good job of demystifying this idea that heroes are somehow fundamentally different from the rest of us. They just found that inner strength to act at crucial moments.
Exactly.
So let's talk about how we can apply this rule to overcome our own inaction and fear in everyday life.
The book lays out a whole range of common situations where the rule can be incredibly helpful. Anything from striking up a conversation with someone you're interested in, to asking for a raise at work, or finally starting that project you've been putting off. Anything that triggers that internal resistance is a prime candidate for the 5-4-3-2-1 approach.
And this ties into that famous Wayne Gretzky quote, right? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Precisely. The book really emphasizes not letting the fear of failure or rejection paralyze us, because that regret of not acting often hurts way more in the long run.
Yeah, the what ifs.
Totally. Mel shares a story about her daughter, Kendall, who had a chance to audition for a musical in New York, but was hesitating. She was afraid she wasn't good enough.
Classic fear.
Right. And Kendall's excuse was revealing. She said if she didn't try, she could at least keep telling herself she was talented, just maybe too lazy to pursue it. It perfectly shows how fear can just stall our dreams.
And to counter that feeling of not being good enough, the book introduces a really powerful little phrase, so what?
Yes. So what if you don't nail it the first time? So what if it's not perfect? At least you had the guts to try. The real power is in the courage to take that first step. The book even reminds us that huge figures like Michelangelo, who initially ran away from painting the Sistine Chapel because he felt overwhelmed.
No way.
Yeah. Or Steve Wozniak, who hesitated about leaving his stable job to co-found Apple. They face their own massive doubts, too.
So what's the takeaway there? That fear is universal, even for the most successful people. The key is not letting it stop you. And the book kind of throws down the gauntlet, asking directly, what are you waiting for?
It does.
While also listing those common excuses we all use to procrastinate on our goals and dreams.
It's a really confronting question. Forces you to look at your own internal barriers.
Okay, so moving on. How can the rule help us stop worrying so much and manage anxiety?
This is a big one. So many of us can relate to this. That habit of constant worry, it just drains so much mental energy and time. The book mentions some wise advice collected by a Dr. Carl Pillimer.
Yes. He interviewed over 1,200 older people asking about life lessons. And one of the biggest things that came through was this deep regret many felt about how much of their lives they'd spent worrying. Worrying about things that didn't matter in the end.
Exactly. Things that, in hindsight, weren't worth the anxiety. Their advice was blunt. Worrying is just a waste of precious time.
And Mel Robbins shares a very relatable story about that herself, with her daughter shopping for a prom dress where worry almost ruined a special moment.
Right. Her daughter was having trouble finding the perfect dress, and Mel realized she was letting her own stress about time and pressure sour the whole experience. Using the countdown 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 helped her snap out of her own head.
Get present again.
Yeah, get present, refocus on the moment, and actually appreciate the joy of finding the dress together eventually.
And building on that, she introduces a really useful practice to redirect our brain's focus when we're caught in that worry cycle.
Yes, when you find yourself spiraling in worry, the book suggests asking yourself two key questions. What am I grateful for in this moment? And what do I want to remember about this situation?
Shifting focus.
Exactly. Those questions force you to shift your focus to the positive aspects of the present, changing your mental state from anxiety towards gratitude.
The book also tackles panic attacks, using a really clear analogy to help us understand what's happening physically.
It uses the analogy of a near-miss car accident. You know, when something startling happens, your body floods with adrenaline, and your brain immediately looks for a reason for that physical reaction.
Right. Swerving car or whatever.
If it finds one, like the near miss, the anxiety usually doesn't escalate too much. But in a panic attack, that same intense physical reaction happens without an obvious external trigger, which can then fuel more anxiety because you don't know why you feel that way.
And it's really interesting how the book points out the physiological similarities between anxiety and excitement.
It really is. Physically, anxiety and excitement feel very similar. Increased heart rate, faster breathing, that surge of energy. The key difference is how our mind interprets or labels those sensations.
So it's about the story we tell ourselves.
Pretty much. If we label it anxiety, we tend to get scared and tense up. But if we can relabel it as excitement or anticipation, we can learn to handle those feelings more positively. Mel shares an anecdote about her son, Quinn, overcoming sleepover anxiety by deciding those jitters were actually excitement about the fun he was going to have.
Finally, on overcoming fear, the book highlights the importance of having what it calls an anchor thought. How does that technique work?
An anchor thought is basically a specific image or idea that you consciously choose to focus on when you feel fear starting to take over.
Like a mental safe harbor.
Sort of. Mel shares her own experience with a fear of flying. Instead of dwelling on the possibility of a crash, she forces herself to vividly picture her destination, the sights, the sounds, the positive feelings of arriving.
So you're giving your brain a concrete, positive alternative to focus on.
Exactly. It provides a positive context for your mind to latch onto, helping to calm the anxiety.
It's like giving your brain a different channel to tune into during fearful moments. Okay, now let's explore how we can build self-confidence and pursue our passions according to the 5-second rule.
A really crucial point the book makes clear is that self-confidence isn't some fixed personality trait you either have or you don't.
Right, it's not like eye color.
No, it's more like a belief in yourself that you actually build through taking action.
Yeah.
We often confuse a lack of confidence with, say, being shy or introverted, but they aren't the same thing at all. You could be introverted and still deeply confident in your abilities.
The book shares a really telling experience Mel Robbins had at Cisco Systems that illustrates this link between confidence and action. Could you tell us about that?
Sure. Mel challenged a group of Cisco engineers, using the 5-second rule, to simply introduce themselves to 3 strangers that day.
Just introduce themselves. Seems simple.
Simple, but potentially nerve-wracking. She told them to pay attention to that initial instinct to connect, count 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then just walk over before their minds could fill with doubts like, what if they ignore me? Or, what will I say?
And the results?
The feedback she shared from people like Trace and Crystal was really positive. Many of them felt, some for the first time in ages, that sense of pushing past their comfort zone. And by doing that, they felt their confidence grow. The action came first, and the feeling of confidence followed.
And this connects to the concept of free traits by Brian Little, which the book introduces. What are these free traits, and how do they relate to confidence and passion?
Brian Little explains that while some parts of our personality are fairly stable, many others are free traits that we can consciously adjust temporarily to pursue personal projects that are really meaningful to us.
So you can act out of character for something important.
Exactly. For instance, someone who is generally quite introverted might act very extroverted and dynamic when they're teaching or presenting on a topic they're deeply passionate about. It's a deliberate action driven by a meaningful goal that pushes them beyond their usual comfort zone.
So how can we start identifying and exploring those passions that drive us?
The book encourages us to follow our curiosity as a primary guide. If something keeps catching our attention or we can't stop thinking about it, we should explore it, even if it just starts as a hobby.
Just dip a toe in.
Right. It also suggests paying attention to feelings of envy. What parts of other people's lives make us feel envious? That emotion, often seen as negative, can actually be a really valuable clue about what we truly desire for ourselves.
And sometimes it all starts with just one small action, doesn't it? Like taking a class or reading a book on a topic, which can then snowball into a major career or life change, like the example of Joe in London mentioned in the book.
Precisely. One small, courageous action, fueled by curiosity, can open unexpected doors and lead us down paths we never even imagined. And the book also shares that inspiring story of Todd in Australia, who finally found the courage, using the 5-second rule, to leave a career he wasn't passionate about. Despite being terrified of disappointing his parents, he acted on that inner voice telling him he wasn't living the life he truly wanted.
Finally, let's talk about enriching our personal relationships by applying the 5-second rule. The book starts this section with a really meaningful story, kind of a parable.
Yes, it mentions the story of a man who kept dreaming about a treasure hidden far away. After a long, difficult journey, he returns home empty-handed, only to discover the treasure was buried in his own backyard all along.
Ah, the power is within.
Exactly. It connects directly to the idea that the power to transform our lives is already inside us. And as Paulo Coelho writes in the book's foreword, it's never too late to discover and express that power. It all starts with self-belief and the courage to act on it.
It's that inner voice again, that intuition that we need to learn to listen to and then have the guts to follow. Mel Robbins shares a very moving personal experience involving a phone call from her dad that really drives this home.
That's right. She got this urgent message from her dad to call him, which immediately scared her. During the call, he told her he had an aneurysm and needed complex brain surgery.
Oh, wow. Terrifying.
Totally. But despite the fear and uncertainty, Mel found the courage, maybe using her own rule implicitly, to ask him directly if he was scared. That opened up this incredibly deep, honest conversation about life, priorities, and the vital importance of living fully in the now within our relationships.
That conversation reminded her of a crucial lesson, didn't it? That there's no perfect time to be honest or express how we feel to the people we care about.
There's only now. The present moment is all we really have. The book also shares other really powerful stories about applying the rule in relationships.
Like,
Like the story of Courtney, who, after years of silence and distance, used the rule to just pick up the phone and call her father, seeking reconciliation.
that takes courage.
Definitely. Or the case of a woman who made the incredibly difficult but firm decision to get divorced, acting with conviction on what she knew, deep down, was right for her own well-being. And this section wraps up with a poignant New Year's message from a young man named Josh, who passed away shortly after, emphasizing how crucial it is never to leave important things unsaid to the people we love.
Wow. That's a really powerful reminder that time is so precious and we need to seize those opportunities to connect authentically with the people who matter in our lives.
Absolutely. The book consistently shows us that across all areas of our lives, from achieving personal goals to deepening our closest relationships, the 5-second rule can be this transformative tool. It helps us push past inaction, fear, worry, and just live with more courage and authenticity.
So, reflecting on everything we've discussed today, it's really clear, isn't it? The incredible power packed into this simple 5-second rule. It's like a key to unlocking our potential and living a much more intentional, fuller life.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
The book's message is that every single one of us has this greatness inside, just waiting to be revealed. And the moment to take that first crucial step towards our goals, our dreams, well, it's right now.
So to everyone who's joined us for this deep dive, we really encourage you to try applying this rule in your own life. The next time you feel that nudge, that instinct to do something you know is important, don't overthink it. Just count.
5, 4, 3, 2, 2, 1, good, go.